Can you hear me? Do you see my presentation? Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for organizing this session. I would like to speak about an ongoing project that is trying to link archaeometry with musical instrument remains and human remains. First of all, I will talk about the findings and the archaeological context during our research in the museum storages of the Archaeological Museum in Madrid, preparing a temporary exhibition on musical instruments held at the museum from the protohistoric and prehistoric departments. We identified a bone flute that was catalogued in the museum at the time as coming from the Celtiberian necropole of Arcobrica, that means an Iron Age flute. For me, that was quite strange because although it is a flute, it didn't look to me as any kind of Iron Age flute that I knew of, and instead, for me, it was very, very much like medieval and modern European flutes. Later publications tried to re-identify the object, but they kept the chronology to the Iron Age. They said that probably was coming from a different necropole, as the rest of the remains didn't match the publications of the previous necropole, because of one old photograph in which they could see the flute and other things together with some of the remains of the Aguilar necropole. However, for me, I insist it was clearly, very clearly, at least morphologically, not like an Iron Age flute. And at the same time, I could take a better look at this bone next to the flute. I don't know if you can see my pointer, but you can see a bone that have like circles incised and several holes in it. That was identified also in the publications as part of a knife handle, but that for me was very, very much like a tailpiece from a medieval bow instrument. I will tell you about tailpieces afterwards if you don't know what they are. This thing here, also catalogued as Iron Age, as I told you, as a part of a knife handler. You can see here because this detail is also important. For me, it was clear that it was not from the Iron Age, but we didn't have any archaeological context. But one of the pieces of that box had a label saying that these pieces were from Villar de Castro, a small village in the province of Soria. Then I went to look to the Taracena Aguirre Carta Arqueológica de Soria from 1941, and he mentions excavations being carried out at Castro by the Marquis of Cerralbo, where he found a skeleton, a flute, incised bones. And luckily, he quotes a manuscript that is still not published, but is available online, which is the Cabré catalog, monumental catalog of the province of Soria. And in that manuscript, he mentions these excavations carried out in Castro. He worked there also with the Marquis of Cerralbo. And then we have then our photograph of the flute and the possible tailpiece. He also mentions another publication, and this publication is another manuscript from the Marquess of Cerralbo, the original excavator of the site that had the permission to excavate the site, where he he talks a little bit of the archaeological context. And I'm not going to read the whole thing because we don't have a lot of time, but to our surprise, it turns out that the skull and the tailpiece were found in the same cistern, a very specific cistern with a lot of ashes, human remains, some pottery, the pottery you have here, and this tailpiece. It was a singular finding because there were other skeletons found in the site, but they were coming all from the necropole of tombs that were carved on the rock. Instead, this was an individual that was buried apart from the rest of the burials and in a cistern. So we had then to try and find the skull. It was not easy, but finally we found that it was held at the prehistory department also of the Museo Arqueológico Nacional of Madrid. This has facilitated our work and the analysis that I'm going to talk about. And this is the cistern where it was found. We also went to Castro to try and determine and understand a little bit the descriptions of the excavations by Marquis of Cerralbo. It's not very relevant here, so I will move on. But this cistern is probably this one or this one, but both of them very far from the other necropode where the rest of the skeletons were found. The identification of the musical instruments is also important because, of course, you have to believe me you don't have to believe me when I say that I think it's a tailpiece. But as you can see here, it's made of bone, and the problem that we had and still have, and it's we hope it's going to be resolved, is that it's not easy to recognize the bone. It's not a cow bone. It's not a sheep bone because it's very big. It's not a cow bone because it has too much sponge material. And experts told us that it has to be a bone that is called from horse to camel bone. So it's quite curious if we find an exotic bone in the area. The tailpiece of the instruments are are this part here that aims at holding the strings so they can be attached to the pegs on the other side and to another peg here. So normally they have 3 to 4 holes here and 1, 2, or 3 holes here to hold also the tailpiece to the instrument, and they belong to different kinds of bow instruments of the medieval period. For instance, you have here a rebec and a medieval viol, but we have many representation of these kinds of pieces all over the Middle Ages and also later on. Not only all over Europe are the ones that I have shown you, but also in the Iberian Peninsula, typically represented in the hands of mudéjar musicians, whereas Islamic musicians that were very usually hired by Christian aristocrats. You can see here, for instance, tailpiece here, and here in this ensemble of street musicians, you see here also a kind of tailpiece. We have very few tailpiece remains all over Europe. They are all dated from the 11th to the 13th, 14th century sometimes. As you can see, they are quite similar to our remain. They have the 3 holes for the strings. The most typical popular instruments only had 3 strings. And these ones here have just 1 hole, but in iconographies and statues, it's very common to find this kind of tailpieces with 2 holes. And even in later periods, in all the iconographies, you have the tailpieces. These are the wooden ones, but 2 holes to hold the device to the instrument. They are very similar also to modern bow instrument tailpieces. And we have another example, this time coming from a lyre. You see it has more holes for more strings, but the shape, even the decoration is very similar. And this time, yes, it has 2 holes to attach the strings. And the flute, again, I told you that for me, it can't be an Iron Age flute. Maybe I am wrong. The radiocarbon will prove me right or wrong. But we have lots of examples of this type of duct sheep bone flutes. Well, ovicaprate flutes, we are not so sure, but probably sheep. It could be also deer or goat, but are most likely sheep. And we have them all over medieval Europe and modern Europe. There are many examples in the bibliography, especially in the United Kingdom. There are even PhDs available online if you're interested, with many of these remains, all coming from these medieval to early modern chronologies. All over Europe, you have them in Norway, you have them in France, Finland, etc. Even there's another example from Catalonia, for instance. So even if, of course, we could carry on the musical studies and try and reproduce the instruments to which the tailpiece would have belonged, or determine the pitches of the flute, that is not very complicated because flutes are easy to measure as musical instruments. There were some research questions that are, for us, were very interesting. First of all, the dating of the remains, because, of course, even if I'm sure from the point of view of the morphology that these are medieval or modern instruments, a dating will definitely answer that question. We would like to know also if the flute, the skull, and the tailpiece are from the same period, and especially if the tailpiece and the individual are related, even they are coming from the same pit, but an archaeometry analysis could tell us if they are really related or not, at least if they are from the same chronology, and if they have, for instance, have had the same mobility or maybe geographical origin. We would like also to identify the animal bone. A camel origin, for instance, would be very interesting considering the Islamic the Islamic provenance of many of these street musicians that we saw in the iconographies, and also, of course, the identification of the sex, age, possible pathologies of the individual. So I don't know why I cannot. Yeah. So we tried and get some funding to do an archaeometric project, and luckily we got awarded one of the funds, yes, by the Palar Foundation. It has an analytic program. So our project is called Music and Performance of the Past. And with my colleague Soraya López Costas, that specializes in analysis and paleopathologies, and Susana de Luis Mariño, which is a curator at the Protohistory Museum and also is the IP of a project of music archaeomusicology in the Music Archaeological Museum. We established this project. We are going to make aDNA and SUMS identification of animal species, and also DNA of the individual, and the collagen for the identification of animal species, carbon-14, of course, for the chronology and dating, and several geochemical analysis to try and establish the mobility and provenance of the individual and try and reconstruct the life history of these remains, and if luckily they are related, maybe the life history of a musician. We have already started the taking of the samples. You have here Dr. Olaya López Costas, which is the IP of the ERC project Polluted Past, that is also collaborating with this project. You can see here some of the extraction process. And for now, what we can tell you, we have started, but we don't have the results yet. But what we can tell you is that the individual is very peculiar. I told you about the singularity of this individual being buried in a very, very different part of the excavation site on his own, with a lot of ashes that are probably quicklime. So it was an individual buried in quicklime, maybe with a musical instrument outside the official necropole of this Christian village, if they are right, and these remains are medieval. But also, well, he was a young adult with a lot of pathologies. He had a very clear asymmetry in the face, would have made him look very peculiar, and a lot of peculiar traumatic injuries that has happened to him during his adolescence, but he survived all of them. So he had a very, very rough life. And he was very in a very rough way. Yes. So, well, these are the singularities. And also another singularity, of course, is this potential association with a musical instrument. So for now, all I can tell you is that we consider that archaeometry in museum collections containing all excavations is very important. It's the only way to really be able to correct errors in the identification. But also we think it brings a lot of possibilities to music archaeological remains, not only for establishing the chronology and the origins of instruments, also for identifying the materials and the techniques and the provenance, but also to connect instruments and performance and to tell life stories of musicians, reconstructing the biographies of these musicians, if we are proven right, and these both remains were related, or at least had the same chronology. It could let us trace the life history of the musical instrument, the links to human remains to musical practice, and offer insight into mobility, origin, even social roles of the musician, if this individual really had a very rough life, but he has particular disabilities that was very typical and still, and until modern times, until the 20th century, individuals with disabilities very typically became musicians and street musicians. So maybe we have here a little story of street musicians from the Middle Ages. I also want to apologize because I cannot stay for the debate session, but please don't hesitate to write to me if you have any questions or suggestions. I would be very happy. And finally, I would like to thank the foundation, Palar Foundation, for the funding for the analytics, Polluted Past CRC project, and the Arqueología de los Paisajes Sonoros project from the National Museum from Madrid. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Raquel. It's a fascinating research, and I believe we will have some questions for you. And good luck with your project. I'm sorry that you cannot stay, but we need to move on now. And now we are going to